What is Indochina and how does this nationalist movement took up in this place or this region? First of all, we will be talking about Vietnam. Now, this Indochina is a very misleading name because the region which is called as Indochina has neither India in it nor China. So Vietnam, it's a country, proper country, and this gained formal independence in 1945, even before India. But it took around 30 years, that is 3 decades, of fighting for being a republic. Vietnam became republic after 3 decades of fight. So we'll see this Vietnam, and the most important thing is Vietnam was also a colony. But why we are discussing it? As we compare it with India, India was also a colony of Britishes, that is UK, and Vietnamese were also colonies. We'll talk about when it was France. It was French colony. And the struggle or the nationalism came from the struggle or the fight against the colonial domination, that is France in this case. So this is the difference, and this is, you can see that there is less similarity between us, that is India, and what happened in this region of Vietnam. This is the map of Indochina. Here we have 3 regions or 3 countries, present day countries, that forms the Indochina, that is Laos, Vietnam and Cambodia. Cambodia, Vietnam and Laos. These 3 in a combined way called as Indochina. So emerging from the shadow of China, Indochina, as I said, comprises of modern 3 countries, Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia. And because of the nearby Chinese empire and region, these Vietnamese or the other regions, they were in strong, you can say, they were maintaining the Chinese system of government. Also, they were maintaining the Chinese culture. So these regions were very much influenced and affected by the Chinese culture. And this Vietnam was also linked to the Silk Route, very famous maritime Silk Route that has brought the goods, ideas and people. Who people? We are going to know just now. And it is also connected, or the trades network were also connected to the hinterlands where non-Vietnamese people were also there, like Khmer Cambodians, they lived. So Khmer Cambodians also, they were linked through the trade path. As this is just a picture showing of the port of Phai Pho. So this Phai Pho is founded by the Portuguese merchants. So colonial domination and resistance, the Vietnam was colonized by French, and this colony, or becoming a colony, it started certain conflicts in mostly all the areas of life. Mostly the military and economic domination by the French. They tried to reshape or change the culture of Vietnamese. Also, this nationalism in Vietnam, this has come, as we said, because of different section of society. They fought against French in different ways. So this nationalism came through it, and it has a somewhat different taste or flavor than our country otherwise. This is just a picture to show that he is Francis Garnier. He was a French officer who led an attack against the ruling Guyenne dynasty. He is being killed by the soldier of the court. Now, how it started? It all started near to 1858 when the French troops landed, and by the mid 80s, means French troops landed in Vietnam in around 1858, and then in few years, that is mid 1880s, they had a firm grip, that is, they have almost controlled over the northern region. And then there was a war between France and China. So after this Franco-Chinese War, the French also took control of Tonkin and Annam. And in 1887, this French Indochina, it was being formed. So they wanted to, consolidate their position. And this one thing which this picture show is because French won the war and they wanted to put their control as a colony. So they did so many things. First is this is the Mekong River, very important river which we'll be talking about a lot. And this is engraving by the French exploratory force in which the Garnier participated, as you see here, this guy. Now they just saw whether this river where it comes from, what are the trades and transport things can be done on this. So they made a lot of maps and pictures for this, because this river was very important as far as the trade and other things are concerned. So there was a blind poet, as we are talking about the nationalism or nationalist thoughts. How does it came into Vietnamese people? How did they represented it? So the time they became the colony and things were going on, French were doing their things. So there was a blind poet. He was Nguyen Din Chiu. So he was a blind poet. So he wrote what he was witnessing in the country, that I would rather face eternal darkness than see the face of traitors. I would rather see no man than encounter one man's suffering. I would rather see nothing than witness the dismembering of the country in decline. So he was not happy with what French were doing, and this is a kind of nationalist thoughts that came into the Vietnamese minds. The first question is, why the French thought colonies necessary? So if I change this name and just say that why the Europeans thought the colonies are necessary, the answer is same for others also as for the French. First of all, because the French or you can see the European countries who were making the colonies, they are pretty small, tiny. Means if you take one state or union territories of India, that probably will have larger area than the European country. So they wanted, first of all, the soil, region and natural resources, and also other goods, essential goods. So for them, first reason was for to make colony is in order to get land, resources and goods. And also the second thought was, these are two thoughts, that Europeans are advanced, and now it is the duty of European countries and people to civilize the other people in the world who are backward people, like the Vietnamese, like the Indians, like the Africans. They all are uncivilized, and it is the duty of these French to do this and other European countries to do this. So as I just showed you the picture of Mekong, So the French, they started building canals and draining lands and in the Mekong Delta to increase the cultivation. And they also made a very good and vast system of irrigation, canal and earthwork. And it involved the labor of Vietnamese, and this increased the rice production. And the rice production was so much that they started exporting it to the international market. That is, if I gave you this idea in the numbers were that the area that is went from 2,74,000 hectares in 1873 to 1.1 million hectares in 1900, and in 1930 it became 2.2 million area was used for the cultivation of rice. And then by 1931 Vietnam was exporting 2/3 of the rice production, and it was the world's third largest exporter of rice in the world. Third largest exporter of rice in the world was Vietnam. So this all this was very good as far as Vietnamese is concerned, and French are also concerned. And then also the infrastructure project, that is the basic projects, were also taken up. Construction of trans Indo-China rail network, and because it formed the link to the northern and southern part of Vietnam and China, this also began. And the final link with Yunnan in China, this was completed in 1910. And then the second line was also built, linking Vietnam to Siam, and Siam is present day Thailand, via the Cambodian capital of Phnom Penh. So this is, business were getting profits, and people were, French have done enough to sustain, and people were also getting, the businesses were profitable. So the next question came was, should colonies be developed? Everyone has a single thought at that time that the colonies had to serve the interest of the mother country. That means whoever has made colony, for example, the Britishers had made India the colony. So it is India who is going to feed the Britishers. So one person called Paul Bernard, he was a very influential writer and policy maker. He strongly has this idea or belief that the colonies, like French colony was Vietnam, now the colonies, the economies of the colonies need to be developed, because they are going to get the profits from these colonies only. So if the living condition or the people standard of living is improved, the colony people or the people who are in the colonies, they are going to buy more good, and that will be the market for example, England can produce and put it in to sell it in the market of very big country India. And if French are producing, they can just put it in the market of Vietnam. So this is how the French business will prosper. And for this, Bernard suggested there are certain barriers. If they want really to grow or economically in Vietnam, first the population levels are quite high, and the agriculture produces less, and the peasants are mostly in debts. So it is necessary to carry out the land reforms just as they did in Japan, because Japan showed that industrialization, or the experience or the process what was done in Japan, it shows that the Indian industrialization can create more jobs and improve the economy. So the colonial economy, as we just saw in Vietnam, was based on two things. We already saw rice cultivation. The second was the rubber plantation. But these both were owned by French and very small, very little Vietnamese elite people, or you can say the people with might and power, Vietnamese. So the rail and port facilities, it was being set up, and the indentured labor. This is a form of labor widely used in plantation from the mid 19th century. That is, laborers worked on the basis of contracts, that is the uh, contracts they make anubandh, that did not specify any rights of the laborers, so laborers wouldn't have any power, but it gave immense power to the employers. The employers have good power. They can, if the laborers are not able to fulfill according to the contract, they may be jailed. So there were these Vietnamese laborers. They were indentured in the with working in the rubber plantation. So Bernard thoughts, we saw that Bernard wanted that the colonies need to be developed. Their standard of living has to be developed. But the French didn't look after that, and they didn't realize that it has to be done. So this is specifically in the rural areas of Vietnam. The landlordism was widespread, and the standard of living of Vietnamese people were not very good. So it declined. So here's a picture of a French weapon merchant. He's a Vietnamese person, and this is how the Vietnamese also were the help of the French doing trading, etc. So there was a dilemma of colonial education. The basic idea was, as we said, French colonialization. That means French wanted the colony, and why they wanted to make the colony? Because they want to civilize the people, civilize the uncivilized. This is why colonization took place. So the basic idea was to because they wanted to civilize them, and the colony people, they have their own customs, they have their own culture, religion and tradition. So they would want, means the French would want to civilize them, even if they have to destroy these local culture, religion and tradition, because for them these culture that they followed, with them Vietnamese are following, they are outdated, and these cultures are only preventing these Vietnamese for the modern development. So first was the education. French thought that this is the only way to civilize the native, that is the people who are native to this place, that is Vietnam region. But they have a dilemma, that is what they should teach them, or in which language, Vietnamese or French, or what other language? Because the French needed an educated labor force, but if they actually educate them, then they will get educated and they will get exposure, and they will in turn start asking question to the colony people, that is colonial domination, right? And also those people called colons, that is the French citizens actually living in Vietnam. If the Vietnamese people are given proper education, then these French citizens living in Vietnam, they might lose their job, because they were teachers, shopkeepers and policemen, right? So that is how the French, they were in this inclination, that they wanted, or they were opposed to the ideas of fully giving education or full access to French education to the Vietnamese. So this is what the idea was. Now, talking modern means, there is one more problem these French were facing, that is the elites, or the you can say the people who are having might and power and money. They are very much into Chinese culture, they are influenced by them, right? So for French to actually consolidate this power and might, they have to counter this civilization, culture of China. Okay, so they systematically tried to crush and dismantle this traditional education system, and they established the French school in Vietnam. But again, Chinese was the language used by the elites and it has to be replaced. The question again was, same dilemma, which language? This Chinese needs to be replaced by what? Vietnamese or French? So there were two opinions for this question. That is, the French language, some policymakers, they said that French language should be the medium of instruction. That is, French language should be taught in the school, or the medium should be French. And by this, these policymakers, they have a thought that Vietnamese will be introduced to the culture and civilization of France, right? That is how they will tie themselves, that is Asiatic France solidly tied to the European France. That is how they will have a tight bonding, you can say. And now the Vietnamese, when they understand this French culture, they will understand the sentiments and ideas of this French culture and also work for the French. They will work in French, means work for the French people. But others have these other policymakers have different thoughts. They suggested that in the lower classes, Vietnamese should be taught, but in higher classes, the French should be taught. So those who learned French and this, if they acquire the French culture, they will be rewarded with the French citizenship. This is a high kind of reward that can be given. But only the Vietnamese elite, that is again the people with money, very small fraction of them, very small fraction was the elite in the Vietnamese people. So they can only enroll to school, and only those who are admitted can actually pass the school. That is why this was done, because there was a known policy of failing the student, particularly in the final year. Because if they pass these Vietnamese, this is the French, if they pass these Vietnamese, then they will be able to qualify for the better paid jobs. So what they did, that 2/3 of the students, they failed. In 1925, for the numbers, in a population of 17 million, only just around 400 passed the examination. So you can understand, out of 17 million, only around 400 or less than them. And these textbooks, of course, were glorified with French and justified that colonial rule should be there. And these books showed the Vietnamese to be backward, and they are just capable of manual labor. They have no intellect or logic, and they are skill copyists, means they can just copy. They are good at copying, but they are not creative. And the school children are told that this French rule can be the only possibility for peace in Vietnam. Peace in Vietnam, because the French are protecting them, that is the Vietnamese peasants especially, from the pirates, and the calmness is because of them. And now the peasants and others can work in good way because the French are there as a shield to them. So here is a picture of a person trying to look modern, and this is a local caricature ridiculing the Vietnamese who had been westernized. He is playing lawn tennis wearing those dresses. So the Tonkin Free School, it was started in 1907, and in order to provide the style of education, European education, you can say Western style education. And these classes were in science, hygiene and French class. The school's approach is that the moderns, that is what it means to be modern, but that means of thinking. That is, it was not enough to learn just science and Western ideas to look modern. The school tried them to adopt, that is Vietnamese, to adopt the Western style, like having short haircut. short haircut. And because traditionally Vietnamese they used to keep long hairs, so there was a hair cutting chant also at that time, that comb in the left hand, scissor in the right, snip, snip, clip, clip. Watch out, be careful, drop stupid practices, dumb childish things, speak openly and frankly, study Western customs. So this education of Tonkin free schools, which was, mostly classes are held in evening and had to be paid for separately, they tried to make these people uh, you can say westernized like this. What I've seen is that there was an idea of the French colonial people to teach the under civilized Vietnamese. So we saw that there was resistance in school. How the students and the teacher, they resisted. The teachers and students, because the curriculum was made by the French, they did not follow them blindly. If there is some opposition, you can say, then they just keep silence. And when the Vietnamese teachers are increased in the lower classes, they changed, they modified the text, because they know, they understood what is written in the textbook. So they modified it very quietly, and then they taught this to the Vietnamese students. And they also criticized what is stated in the books. For Vietnamese, the content was not up to the mark, means not in the Vietnamese favor but in French favor. So in 1926 there was a major protest in the Saigon native girls school. What happened was, see, there was a girl who was sitting in the front bench. So the teacher came and asked this Vietnamese girl to leave this space and sit in the back, because this place has to be taken by some French girl. Now this girl, she denied. She said, no, I'm not going to sit on the back bench. I will continue sitting here. So what happened? She was expelled. The principal expelled this Vietnamese girl. And then these students, the other fellow students, they got angry. And then we got angry, they protested. And there were spread of open protest, because now the supporting students, you can say, who were protesting for this girl, they were also expelled. So this lead a further chain reaction for the others to follow to protest. And when this situation was seen by the principal and the colonial people that it is going out of the hand, so they were forced to take this girl back who was being expelled. But the principal, he was very harsh. He took the student back, with Vietnamese girl back, but he said, I will crush all Vietnamese under my feet, right? So there are certain words also he said that just shows his anger towards the Vietnamese. Then there were other things also happening. The students fought against the colonial government's effort to prevent these Vietnamese students to qualify for white-collar job. And there was a patriotic feeling, there was a conviction, and that is their duty of the educated to fight for the benefit of society. And there was a conflict, that is because the French saw that these elite will be passed, or they will take the place of the colons and ours. But the students in 1920s, they were forming various political parties like the Party of Young Annan, and also publishing certain nationalist journals, and in journals like Annanese Student. So now these students also were the part of political and cultural battles. And this, the French sought to strengthen their rule in Vietnam through what? Control of education. So they tried to change the values, the norms, the people thinking, and also make them believe that French civilization is superior to the Vietnamese civilization. But these Vietnamese individuals, they were fearing that they are losing their territory. They are also seeing that their culture and customs are being devalued by these French people, and there is a kind of master-slave mentality which is emerging. So this battle against the French colonial education, this was the idea of the Vietnamese to go out of this colony and become independent, and we'll see how this took place. Before we go ahead, let me tell you some important dates. In 1802, Nguyen An becomes emperor, symbolizing the unification of the country under the Nguyen dynasty. In 1867, Cochin, China, that is the south, becomes the French colony. In 1887, there was a creation of Indo-China Union, which includes this Cochin China, Annan, Tonkin, all these are in Vietnam, and Cambodia, and then later Laos. In 1930, Ho Chi Minh forms the Vietnamese Communist Party. In 1945, the Viet Minh, it started a general popular insurrection. Bao Dai abdicates and Ho Chi Minh declares independence in Hanoi. In 1954, the French army is defeated at Dien Bien Phu. In 1961, Kennedy decides to increase the US military to South Vietnam. 1974, Paris Peace Treaty was done. In 1975, NLF troops enter Saigon. And finally, in 1976, the Socialist Republic of Vietnam is proclaimed. So what was happening in other parts? Because the revolution in small chunks, small parts also was taking place. Hygiene, disease, and everyday resistance. That is, the political battles are being fought in every sphere of everyday life. There are other institutions also which this was going on because people were expressing their anger for the colonizers. So there was a plague in the Hanoi. This is a city. So we'll take the case of health and hygiene. Now what French did, they decided to rebuild Hanoi, and they took the latest ideas of latest modern architecture and engineering skill to make this city modern. In 1903, this modern part of Hanoi, it was struck by plague, and it was bubonic plague. And there was a serious conflict, because the French wanted to control this disease and how it happened. So the French part of Hanoi, if you see this picture, this is a modern Hanoi. These are colonial buildings. This came up in the French part of Hanoi, not on the Vietnamese part. So French part was quite a well-built, beautiful and clean city, had wide avenues, and the sewer system was well laid out. But the natives, that is the Vietnamese quarter, not very modern facilities were there, and in heavy rains and floods, the waste overflow on the street. That is the problem of unhygienic environment in the native quarter of Vietnamese. So this became the cause of the plague, and plague was caused by mouses. So what happened? There were large sewer in the modern part of the city. That is the symbol of the modernity. So there were large sewer being laid here like this. Now the sewer was a great transport system for whom? For rats. Now because it was underlaid or underneath the ground, the mouses, they can easily move around all the city without any problem, and this was the problem. This caused that bubonic plague, right? And these mouses would come out to the French homes also through the pipes. So now what to do? There is only one possibility: rat hunt. Kill the rat. That is to stop the plague. So rat hunt was started in 1902 to curb the rat population, to finish them. So the French hired Vietnamese and they paid them on per basis, means on per rat basis. That is, rats, Vietnamese started catching a lot of rats. For instance, 20,000 were caught, but the mouse were not ending, the rats were not ending. And this is a kind of people learn that, okay, now we can come together and we can now bargain to the French people. The Vietnamese thought that. Now they have an idea of negotiating. So the bounty was paid how? When someone comes with the tail as the proof that, okay, I have killed a rat. But what rat catcher would do, these Vietnamese would do what? They would just clip the tail and they will release the rat. And this was done again and again, and some people even started raising the rats for the bounty, for the money. So because this was happening, French they have to scrap this bounty program. They cannot continue with this. And this bubonic plague swept through the area in 1903, and the rat menace marks the limits of French power and the contradictions that they actually came there to civilize the people, right? And the rat catchers, those Vietnamese, they also showed that they are against the French in everyday life also. Then how this religion or religious sentiments helped the anti-colonial sentiments and the nationalism? See, this the French occupied Vietnam military because they want to militarily they want to reshape the Vietnamese social and cultural life. So what did they do? First of all, we have to understand that the Vietnam religious belief was mixture of various cultures and various you can say religious belief: Buddhism, Confucianism, and local practices. So Confucius is what? Let us understand this. He was a Chinese thinker. He developed a philosophical system based on good conduct, practical wisdom, and proper social relationship. And people were taught under Confucius thoughts that they have to respect their parents and submit to elders. They were also told that the relationship between the ruler and the people is just like the children and the parents. This was Confucius thoughts, or Confucianism, like this, Confucianism. So this is the mixture of religious belief of Vietnamese, Buddhism, Confucius, and local practices. Now, Christianity, because the French were there and French missionaries, they tried to introduce the Christianity. But the Vietnamese, they don't want that. Because they thought that, French thought that Vietnamese says that there is a supernatural power or something like that. So they just want to change that. And from the 18th century, many religious movements were hostile, or they were against the Western presence. So first movement, that is the religious movement against the French control and what Christianity they were spreading, was the first one, Scholars' Revolt in 1868. This is important. This is the first of its kind. So you can see this picture, the execution of Father Bory. He was a Catholic missionary. So first revolt was this, Scholars' Revolt. And this also spread the anger, you can say. Because who led this revolt? It was led by the officials at the imperial court. That is, those who are ruling, those officials in that ruler part. I'm not saying French, the other Vietnamese ruler, you can say, those officials were in this revolt, so scholar revolt, and they led a general uprising in Guan and Ha Tien. Now these two places are very important. In these provinces, over 1,000 Catholics were killed, and but Catholic missionaries, they were very active. By the middle of the 18th century and by the early 17th century, they have converted around 3,300,000 people to Christianity. So this again was you can say impotence for the uprising of patriots to stop this. And the elites in the Vietnam, they were educated in Chinese, and again China thought, that is Confucianism. So Confucius and Chinese, these are the two thought. But the religious belief among these peasants was shaped by different syncretic tradition. That is, you can understand by combining the Buddhism and the local tradition, belief and religious belief, right? So these were there were certain movements which took place, but French, they stopped it. There was one more movement. First was that revolt I told you. The second was the Hoa Hao. This started in 1939, and this gained a lot of you can say attention and popularity in the fertile Mekong River Delta area, and it drew a religious idea which is popular in the anti-French uprising of the 19th century. And who was the founder of this Hoa Hao movement? He was called as Hyun Fu So. Now, he used to perform miracles, help the poor, and he criticized the expenditure, useless expenditure. He also opposed the sale of child brides, gambling, and he was opposing the alcohol and opium. Now, French did all the thing to suppress the movement which is inspired by Hyun Fu So. They declared him mad and called him Mad Bones and sent him to mental asylum. But the doctor who came to him, he became his follower. And finally, in 1941, it was being declared that this guy Fu So is not insane, he is sane. And he was expelled to Laos. And the followers, most of them, were sent to the concentration camps. So these movements which take place, they have very different or contradictory relationship with the nationalism which was mainstream. And they cannot discipline these groups, they cannot support the mainstream people, cannot support the ritual and practices. But still, all these movements, two movements we saw, first was the revolt and second was by Hyun Fu So, this added up to the sentiments of anti-imperialist among the people. Then was the vision of modernization. So everyone tried to resist the French colonialism, but there were certain questions that what is this modernism and who should we call nationalists? What is the modernism? That means we just leave all the ideas and social practices that we were doing, or we just understand or consider the West as they are developed and civilized and we just copy the West. So all these questions were in the minds. So different answers were there for these questions. Some intellectuals, they thought that the Vietnamese tradition, these traditions need to be overhauled or strengthened if they want to stop or resist the domination of the West. But others thought that Vietnam has to learn from this West. Means they must oppose the foreign domination, but they must learn from this West also, that is the European countries. So this debate went on. So in late 19th century, this was the domination, French domination was resisted mostly by the Confucian scholar activist who saw, because they saw that their world is crumbling because of the French domination. There was a person, Fan Boi Chao. He was educated in Confucian tradition. He was one kind of nationalist, and he was the major figure in anti-colonial resistance from the time he formed a society, revolutionary society, and in Vietnamese it is called as Dai Tan Hoi in 1903, and the head was Prince Quang Diaz. So this guy, Fan Boi Chao, he met the Chinese reformer Liang Qichao in Yokohama, and this Fan's book, The History of the Loss of Vietnam, it has strong influence and advice from this Chinese reformer Liang Qichao, and this was the bestseller. Even plays were made on this, and this because it was a kind of connection between the China and Vietnam. There was a ties between them, and the elites, of course, Vietnamese and Chinese, they shared culture. So it is this double loss that Fan laments. That is a lament that was typical of reformers from within the traditional elite, that we are losing the ties, sovereignty also, and the ties of the culture with the Chinese. Now there was other nationalist also, which was called as Fan Boi Chao, means he differed with Fan Boi Chao, and the person is called as Fan Chu Trin. Means there were two nationalists which are remarkable. One was Fan Chui Bao, we just learned about him, and the other was Fan Chu Trin. So the difference between these two thoughts are being asked normally, so you should understand this. Now, he was very hostile. He doesn't want any monarchy, and he also opposed that idea that we should use the court or the monarchy for resisting the French. What his idea was, he wanted a democratic republic. So a republic is a form of government based on popular consent and popular representation. It is based on the power of the people as opposed to the monarchy. So he is quite influenced by the West democratic ideals, and he doesn't want actually to just reject the Western civilization. He was in favor of Western civilization. He demanded that the French should do something for the country. That is, the French should set up some legal and educational institution also. They must do something to develop the agriculture and industries. This is what Fan Chu Trin has thoughts. And then other way of becoming modern, we will take the examples of Japan and China. As we said that the early Vietnamese, they have very close ties and relationship with Japan and China. So the Japan and China, they both are providing a model. And the refugees of Vietnam people, Vietnamese, they just go to, if they want to escape from French police, there was a great location of you can say they can go. That is, there was kind of Asian network being built so that they can just run to Japan and China. So in first decade of this 20th century, a Go East movement, it became popular. And some 300 Vietnamese students, they in 1907-1908, they went to Japan for modern education. But the primary idea was, the objective was, they wanted to drive out French or overthrow them from the country. They wanted to overthrow also the puppet emperor, and they wanted to bring back the Nguyen dynasty. And who deposed this Nguyen dynasty? The French. So these nationalists looked for foreign helps and arms, and they were happy. They were happy. That is, they appealed to the Japanese also, because they thought the Japanese are Asians too. So Japanese are way ahead. They have already modernized themselves, and they were successful to colonize means to resist the colonies if anyone comes there to make them as a colony. So they resisted very successfully, and also they they had a victory over Russia in 1907, and that shows that their might as a military power. So Vietnamese students, they established a branch of Restoration Society in Tokyo, but after 1908, Japanese ministry, it just stopped them, and many, including this Fan Boi Chao, they were just deported from Japan and sent. They have to seek exile in where? China and Thailand. So if you see this picture, this is the cartoon of Vietnamese nationalists. They are chasing these imperialists. So development in China, this also inspired Vietnamese nationalists. We just saw that what happened in Japan. These events influenced the Vietnamese. But what happened in China also influenced them, because in 1911 there was a long monarchy in China, and Sun Yat-sen, under his leadership, it was being overthrown. That is, monarchy was overthrown and republic was set up. So now, inspired by these events, Vietnamese students, they organized the Association for the Restoration of Vietnam. They call it as Vietnam Quan Phuc Hoi. Right? So this is how they made proper you can say associations. The idea is not just to have a constitutional monarchy, but now the idea of Vietnamese and Vietnamese students and the upcoming generation was to have a democratic republic. Right? So how this came, how this anti-imperialist movement took place, we'll talk about that. The communist movement and Vietnamese nationalism. So what was the communist movement? Who were the people who took the lead of this movement? There was a Great Depression of 1930s, and as whole world felt it, so does Vietnam. The prices of rubber and rice fell, and this leads to the rising rural debts, unemployment and rural uprising. The main provinces were Ge An and Ha Tin, and these places or these provinces were known as electrical fuses, because if anything happens, it starts from here only. And even the French, what they did, because of all these things, they tried to stop this uprising. They even used the bomb to stop the demonstrator. They bombed from planes. So when this happened in February 1930, Ho Chi Minh, he is a very important character. You have to understand him and remember him. Ho Chi Minh, he brought together all the different parted or nationalist group, and he just combined them to form Vietnamese Communist, that is Vietnam Cong San Dang, Vietnam Cong San Dang Party. It was later renamed as Indo-Chinese Communist Party. And in 1940, Japan occupied Vietnam, because Japan has an imperial idea of driving to control this Southeast Asia. Now these nationalists, they fought against Japanese. So, and they were fighting already with French. So there are two countries they are fighting. The League for the Independence of Vietnam, Vietnam Doc Lap Dong Min, and this later came to be known as Viet Minh. This fought Japanese occupation and finally recaptured Hanoi in September 1945. So now this Democratic Republic of Vietnam was formed, and this guy, Ho Chi Minh, he became the chairman. Now the new Republic of Vietnam, there is a word we'll see, obscurantist. Obscurantist, this is a very typical word. that is person or ideas that mislead. So obscurantist, a new republic now was formed, but there were different challenges because there was the emperor Bao Dai, and using Bao Dai as a puppet, the French tried to control the territory. And because of this French offensive, this Viet Minh, they were forced to retreat, and they just found shelter on the hills. But after 8 years of fighting, French were finally defeated in 1954 at Dien Bien Phu. French were finally defeated at Dien Bien Phu. But there was a general of French army, Henry Navarre. He was very confident that they will be victorious. But on 7th May 1954, this Viet Minh, which we are talking about, annihilated, captured more than 16,000 French expeditionary corps, entire commanding staff, also general was included, 16 colonels, 1949 officers, and they were all taken as prisoners. So there were peace negotiations going on in Geneva, which followed the French defeat, and then Vietnam was persuaded, it was forced actually to form or to accept the division of the country. So now the Vietnam is in two parts, northern and southern. So Ho Chi Minh and the communists, they took the power in the north, while the Bao Dai was put in power in the south. So let me tell you what happened. It was divided into two parts. These parts went to Ho Chi Minh, or you can say communist. And here it goes to Bao Dai. So finally, two parts were made. But as we saw, the division of India, that is India and Pakistan, it followed a lot of bloodshed. So same happened here. There were a lot of destruction and deaths. But there was a coup led by Go Din Diem. He and his partisans, they overthrown Bao Dai regime. That is, this regime was overthrown by Go Din Diem. But he was also very repressive. This guy Diem, he was repressive and authoritarian government he formed. He would just kill the people, mostly the communists who opposed them. He also retained that Ordinance 10, and this was very important, Ordinance 10. That is the French law that permitted Christianity, that Christianity is allowed, but he just outlawed the main religion there, Buddhism. But here came NLF, National Liberation Front. So this NLF, because it was opposing this guy Go Din Diem. So with the help of, now here we have NLF, here we have Ho Chi Minh. So this NLF took help of Ho Chi Minh, and then they together fought for the unification of the country, which were after Geneva Convention, you can say Geneva discussions. This was in two parts. Now, when these are two parts, this is by Ho Chi Minh. Here Ho Chi Minh was the ruler, and here we have NLF. Now, both of them were communist. So, if they are combined, means these two parts combined, so there will be a communist government. And if you know, this Laos, Cambodia and Vietnam and Thailand, that is Siam, and various other nearby country, Burma, etc., they will all have, because of the influence of this region, they all will have communist party, because of course the China was also taking the communist path. But because of this, America got worried, and this is how America entered the war. This is the entry of the US into the war. And the basic reason was they don't want this communist regime to prosper and to spread into other parts of the nearby region. But when the US entered, they suffered great loss. From 1965 to 1972, this number 3403,100, it's a huge number. That is 34 lakhs US services personnel served in Vietnam, and 7,500 near to them were women. So this is how the American soldiers, they are searching in the rice field for the Vietcongs. So now, because US was a superior country, it has technology, it has good medical supplies, but the casualties were still high. About 47,244 Americans died in battle, and 3,03,704 were wounded. And out of these, 23,014 were permanently declared as disabled. So this struggle with US or Vietnam and US was very brutal. The US used everything. They used B-52, and that this was at that time most powerful bomber plane. They used all chemical weapons, napalm, Agent Orange, phosphorus bomb, everything on the civilians, everything on the Vietnamese. But the effect of war was also felt in US. The government saw that nothing is, the people saw, and they said government that you are just, this is indefensible what you are doing is. Because the youth that were sent were from very poor class, minorities, very unprivileged class. Those young men were sent to Vietnam, and those having a university graduate degree, they were just, waved off, and others were just stopped. Means good people or wealthy people, you can say, were actually, you can say that they were just covered up, and others who are poor, they were just sent to Vietnam. This is what US people thought. And there were various US media and films, and this played a very important role. They showed that that is the green berets and apocalypse now. They all showed, one movie showed Vietnam is means the good part of Vietnam. The other showed the good part of US. Some movie shows that what is the wrong thing. Somebody movie shows that what is the better thing. So all these, people were aware now because of the media and the movies. People knew what is happening. So as the war went on, US policy planners, they have a thought, or they have a fear that the victory of this Ho Chi Minh, if this government wins, it will start a domino effect. That is, in the nearby region, the communist government will be formed, as I suggested you earlier. And they just see, US underestimated Vietnamese. They used all the might and power, but still they were not able to do or achieve what they wanted. See, in December 1972, Hanoi was bombed like this. This was the situation. But still, Vietnamese people stood and they fought for their country. Napalm, this word has come. It's a kind of very dangerous, you can say, fire bombs, an organic compound used to thicken gasoline for fire bombs. This mixture burns slowly, and when it comes in contact with surface like the human body, it sticks and it continues to burn. This was developed in US and it was used in the Second World War. And despite an international outcry, this was used in Vietnam. There was a Ho Chi Minh Trail. So what is this trail? This is just a path, This path is going to Laos, coming to Vietnam, then again going to Cambodia. So it was all, this path was somewhat different for any other country like US to understand. So this story of Ho Chi Minh is what very important to understand the nature of the Vietnamese which fought against, how the Vietnamese fought against the US. That is what means Vietnamese, they have limited resources, but still they took it to their advantage. This trail, an immense network of footpath and roads, and this would help in transporting the men and material from the north to south and vice versa. And around 20,000 North Vietnamese troops were using this trail. And this trail has bases and hospitals. Trucks were used, and some things were transported by men and women, 25 kgs on their bags, and if they have bicycles, then 70 kgs, 70 kilos. So as I said, most of the trail was outside Vietnam, that is Laos and Cambodia, and US regularly bombed this area just because they don't want the supplies to go from this part to this part. But whenever they do so, see, whenever they bomb, these people, they were so resistant, they just rebuild the road which is damaged by US bombings. So this is how this Ho Chi Minh Trail helped the Vietnamese and stopped the American to achieve. Basically, they were there to massacre the Vietnamese. This is also on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, that is, it has the path or in mountains, the regions where the other people like the Western countries, if they have just landed to fight, they will not be able to find it out. And then the nation and the heroes, there were so many things happened in the Vietnam, because basic was the idea of the nationalist ideology. So women, as we saw in the European countries like Germany, Italy, France, women allegory was used to symbolize a country. So women also, if you see in Vietnam, they were quite equal if you compare it with China. But still, if you talk about Vietnam, they were not given any privilege, or they were not that much free. So as the national movement grew, that is the nationalist movement went on, the status of women came to be questioned, and new image of womanhood this emerged. And mostly writers and political thinkers, they begin idealizing women who rebelled against the social norms. So there was a famous novel in 1930s by Nath Lin, and this caused a scandal because the woman showed in the novel, she just left the forced marriage and married some other men who by her choice, and that man was a nationalist. So this rebellion marked the change in the Vietnamese society also. This just shows that how the society was changing. So if you see the heroes of past times, rebel women were celebrated. In 1930, the nationalist Phan Boi Chau, he wrote a play which is based on the Trung sisters. They fought against the Chinese domination, and they were fighting, and after that they died when they saw that okay, we will be caught. So they just died. Means they were not caught by the Chinese, they were patriots. So this is kind of patriotism which was shown by paintings, plays, novels, and 30,000 these Trung sisters, they gathered 30,000 people and resisted the Chinese for 2 years. Then finally they committed suicide. They didn't surrender to the army. These were Trung sisters. Other women were also there. This is Triu Au. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's Triu Au. So this is the image of Triu Au, worshipped as a sacred figure. She was an orphan, then she lived with his brother, and she left home, went to jungle, formed an army finally, and she also fought against the Chinese. And when her army was crushed, she became a sacred figure because she drowned herself. So this is the people who were, or the women who are regarded as important figure, as a symbol of nationality, and people would often get inspired by them. They fought for their country. Women as warrior, as we saw, women, because the militia, many things were going on, and the stories also we saw, the stories because of this, the women actually came and they joined the army and they took the rifle. There were stories like killing the enemy single-handedly by Yuan Thi Juan, and she shot Jet with 20 bullets only. So these were the stories. And women were just not only represented as warrior, but workers also, with one rifle in hand and other hand was carrying a hammer. So whether young or old, women were depicted as selflessly working and fighting for the country, that is Vietnam country. So as casualties went up in 1960s, women were urged to join the struggle in large numbers. And many women actually joined. They helped with nursing, constructing the underground rooms and tunnels, and fighting the enemy. This trail, as I showed you, Ho Chi Minh Trail, they would, young women or young volunteers kept open this 2,195 of strategic roads and guarded these 2,500 key points on this trail. They built 6 airstrips, neutralized tens of thousands of bombs, transported tens of thousands of kilograms of cargo, weapons, food, and shot down 15 planes. So between 1965 to 1975, 17,000 youth who worked on the trail, 70 to 80% were women. And on military historian, one military historian, he said that there were 1.5 million women in the regular army, the militia and local forces and professional teams. 1.5 million women. So at that time also, and at the time of peace also, women worked a lot. Now they were shown not as a warrior, but their image as a factory worker, agriculture, cooperatives, production units, they were shown. So this is a picture of a woman with gun in one hand, and here is the picture of Vietnamese women doctors nursing the wounded. Finally, the war ended. And how this ended? Because the war was quite prolonged for US also, and US has actually failed for what objective the US has entered into the war. Vietnamese resistance was too much for US. Right? In between, thousands of young US soldiers, they lost their lives, and also there is no number. Vietnamese civilians were also killed, and this was the first television war. Everyone could see it. Many men, when many became disillusioned with the US was doing, writers like Mary McCarthy, actors like Jane Fonda, they also visited North Vietnam and they praised what this country has done for their defense. Vietnamese have done for their defense. If you see, the scholar Noam Chomsky, he called this war the greatest threat to peace, to national self-determination, and to international cooperation. So this was the widespread questioning of government policy, and this strengthened the move to negotiate and actually end the war. And it was signed in Paris, the peace settlement, in January 1974. and this ended conflict with US, but internal fighting between Saigon regime and NLF continued. Then finally NLF, National Liberation Front, occupied the presidential palace in Saigon on 30 April 1975, and Vietnam was unified. And this is a picture of the result. That is the Viet Cong soldiers. They are posing triumphantly atop a tank after Saigon is liberated.